Welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm going to get started in a minute. I just need to let everybody on social media know that the stream is currently on the air. Okay, I decided to call an audible on tonight's live stream. Originally, I was going to be talking about how black men have a hard time building with black women, but I decided to put that topic to the side. I may do that topic next week, or I may do it as a video. Now, I wanted to do a video regarding a comic book YouTuber known originally as Diversity in Comics but is now known as Comics Matter, your boy, Zack. And over the last couple of weeks, he has been participating in some very erratic behavior, as some other comic YouTubers have addressed in their videos. And as I've been watching Comics Matter, your boy, Zack, and the videos from other comic YouTubers like John Della Rose and other comic YouTubers like Thinking Critical, I have to ask the question, is Comics Matter, your boy Zack, now a man in crisis? And I asked that question because it was way back in about 2018 or 2019 that Comics Matter, your boy Zack started out on YouTube as Diversity and Comics. And as Diversity and Comics, he talked about the sad state of affairs in the comic book industry and how many of these far left social justice types who were grossly unqualified for their jobs were doing damage to the comic book industry with products coming out of the all new, all different Marvel and other publishers like DC and independent publishers like Image and Dynamite. And he built up a following of over 100,000 subscribers in that time and also had several successful crowdfunding projects such as Jawbreakers, Lost Souls, and other projects that basically made over six figures. And he was doing great, had great success as related to building up his platform on social media during the culture wars. And as he had built up this great success during the culture wars, what happened with your boy Zack is he was on his way to becoming one of the big stars of the independent comics medium as we were having this culture war, also known as Comicsgate. Now, as we were having this culture war with Comicsgate, where he and other independent creators such as Ethan Van Sciver and many others were looking to put their independent comics on the marketplace, your boy Zack basically again got a lot of success and built up a huge following online, where he was basically, again, building up this huge audience as he cooked and roasted many of these very terrible comics made by these social justice warriors who basically, again, were inexperienced as related to the craft of comic book writing and comic book storytelling, and also gave us insight to the sad state of affairs in the comic book industry with many of his videos. And he, again, was doing very well from about 2018 to about 2023 or so. However, as we started to get into later 2023, this is where people started to notice a change in the tone of your boy Zack. And as 2024 went on, we started to notice a serious erratic decline as related to his behavior. Now, this whole pattern of behavior has many people in comics YouTube wondering if your boy Zack is having some serious issues. And I have to wonder that myself because, as someone who has experience in publishing and has also had issues as related to getting older, I could look at your boy Zack and see some issues that he was having that I could relate to. I mean, I could see where he was basically, again, becoming really frustrated as related to the business of publishing. I could see that from my own experience because I know how rough this business is. I really have, again, as someone who has been doing independent publishing since about 2009 and even did that even before 2002, I can tell you that this business is a rough one. And it's looking to me like his whole business of doing indie comics, he's having a bit of a rough time with it as related to one, creativity, and two, having a problem with getting stuff to customers. This is what YouTubers like John Della Rose have claimed, that he has went out here and bought products from your boy Zack and has not really received those products. So I'm seeing where he's having some issues as related to his business, as related to possibly his catalog. And that can be very frustrating because I know how things work as related to publishing, and I know how stressful it can be. So I know how that one part can be one of the issues as related to possibly leading to these issues that your boy Zack possibly is having. Yeah, you can go out here and again launch a lot of Indiegogos and Kickstarters, but the whole thing is the fulfillment can be most difficult. And again, the fulfillment can be really difficult because you have to work out the logistics as related to the schedule of not only writing the book, but getting the art from the artist and then getting that to the letterer and then getting that to all the finished product as related to formatting it on a computer and then getting all that done. And that can be a lot of work for just a guy with a one-man operation, because while you're putting all that together is a lot of work. I know that from my own experience, and also going out here, in addition to doing that, doing multiple YouTube videos, that can really start to take a toll on someone. It can really take a toll on you over time as related to not only your physical health, but also your mental health. So that I've had to deal with that myself. So I look at your boy Zack, and again, I look at his work schedule, and that could have been one of the things that led to this whole change as related to things, as related to dealing with the stress of, again, running a business all by yourself without any staff. And that compounded with the tragic death of Ed Piskor and the tragic death of comic historian possibly has your boy Zack possibly thinking about his mortality, possibly has him thinking about his mortality as related to being about 50 years old, because he's about the same age I am. I'm about 51 right now. I passed my 51st birthday this week. And seeing guys like Ed Piskor and seeing guys like comic historian pass away, that could really possibly have affected him as related to thinking about his own mortality, and that possibly has him acting erratic around here. So I'm looking at his pattern of behavior and him again attacking people online, and it could possibly be that he's having some issues as related to things, as related to possibly the stress of working at a publishing company and having stress as related to thinking about his mortality as a comics publisher, and also thinking about how much he accomplished in that time and how his business possibly has hit this plateau And as it's hit this plateau, possibly frustrated about trying to find a way to get that progress and build that momentum. Because when it comes to a publishing company, what happens with publishing companies is you go through periods of a cycle where, yes, you can have a period where you're starting out and everything is rough and you have the learning curve. Then you have the rise of your business. Then you have the peak. And then there's the decline. And that's the rough period, the decline period, because that's where you've got to start going and starting to regroup as related to your business, starting to regroup as related to your business, because what got you popular in the beginning isn't going to be the thing that keeps you on top. No, what got you popular in the beginning is not going to keep you competitive. And when you're in the publishing business, you have to understand that you have to adapt to the business and the marketplace. And this is something I don't think Zack really thought about as related to his publishing business. I mean, his whole thing was going after the social justice warriors and saying he's going to make a product that's not like the social justice warriors. However, that's not going to keep you competitive in the world of publishing. Yeah, you might get some Kickstarters funded, but you're not going to be able to keep that momentum going. You're not going to be able to keep that momentum going as related to a publishing business, because what got you again in the door isn't going to keep the customers excited. This is something I know from, again, experience myself being an author and a publisher. What got you in the door and got people's attention isn't going to keep their attention. And that's where a publisher really starts to have this really rough period. And that rough period basically is one where a publisher has to regroup. And that's what every publisher usually has to do. I mean, this is what Marvel had to do after they had all of that popularity in the 60s. They had to regroup in the 70s because the books started out with the Marvel age of comics with a lot of popularity. But by the time we got to the early 70s, they lost a lot of heat as related to popularity. And we started to see them go into a creative decline. So what gets you in the door ain't going to keep people in there. And he's basically possibly dealing with this whole business issue as related to plateauing. And because a lot of businesses, they do plateau after a period of time. And then you've got to come up with something new and fresh. And that's the roughest period to be in. So when it came to him, again, he came to popularity as related to, oh, you're challenging the social justice warriors. But we're now in a period where the whole activist social justice agenda basically is phasing out. So dude is basically in a place where his business is in a bad place. And again, in a bad place as related to what are you going to do next? Because this is something every publisher has to think about. Okay, I did this story. What am I going to do next? And that's where I think Zack is as related to his business of producing comics. Not only he is in that place, I think Ethan Van Sciver is also in that place. And yeah, he made the Cyber Frog comic, but the whole thing is now we're in a different period where you cannot keep talking about social justice warriors and how far left and woke comics are, because that argument, yes, that argument worked 5 years ago, but it's not working today. And again, this is not the kind of argument that's going to get people putting in pledges for comics. Comics, many people say that they have not received, which is another, again, logistical issue, a logistical issue that really has not only affected a lot, has affected a lot of people. I mean, I've heard from people saying that they didn't get their comics from many campaigns, and this is all part of the issues going on, not only with your boy Zack, and also is also going on with many other creators. So I look at your boy Zack, and again, now the behavior he's been participating in, and it definitely looks to me like he's in a crisis of some kind. I don't know if it's like in my book, The Man Crisis, of him being that type of man in crisis. But what I believe the kind of crisis he's in is possibly having to do with a crisis of one, his business, and two, a crisis of being in midlife. Because when it comes to men our age, we do go through some issues as related to getting older. And as we get older, we start to think about what we've accomplished. And as we start thinking about what we've accomplished, some of us start to get frustrated. Some of us start to get stressed out. I mean, this is something I've had to deal with myself for the last 2 years, where you start to get frustrated that you're not really where you want to be. And as you get frustrated about not being where you want to be, some people basically start to get frustrated to the point where they start lashing out at people. They start lashing out at people as related to the issues that they're having, as related to the being middle aged and not really feeling like you accomplished what you wanted to accomplish. That's what usually happens to a lot of guys when they get older. They start to get frustrated about the state of their lives, and they start to think about where they're going. So that could be one of the reasons why your boy Zack has basically, again, changed as related to his behavior, is he possibly could be going through a midlife crisis as related to his personal life. He could be going through a midlife crisis as related to his personal life, and he possibly is in a place where he feels like he's not really where he wants to be as related to the success that he wants, and he feels like he doesn't have that direction as related to his business. I mean, I know from being a publisher myself for the last 15 years, it can be very stressful to work in this business. I mean, it can be very stressful to work in this business and try to get books out on time. It can be very stressful to try to keep the audience interested, because sometimes when you're publishing books over a long period of time, what can happen is the audience starts to take your books for granted. They start to take your content for granted. They start to take the books and they start to say, oh, this book will be there. I don't need to buy this right now. But what they don't see is that you've got a budget and expenses as related to your books. They see that you've got a budget and expenses as related to what you're putting together. They don't see that you need to be able to get all this stuff to cost out. No, a lot of people think, oh, I can just wait and not buy that book. And that can really, again, stress you out over time, because you're trying to get this profit in on this book, because in publishing, 90% of all books fail. And with 90% of all books winding up failing, this was something that just could, again, weigh on you as you're trying to get projects together, to get them to cost out. And also you trying to, again, as you're trying to get projects to cost out, be able to get your accounting in order, because as you're trying to get these projects going, these projects also, you not only have to pay for the artwork, you also have to pay for the lettering, you have to pay for the printing and shipping cost of fulfillment, because if you do use a fulfillment service, you have fees that you got to pay and all that comes out of your crowdfunding money. I mean, a lot of people just sit there and they think, oh, this guy made $100,000 or this guy made $1 million, and that, oh, they get the $1 million. No, what happens in the case of a crowdfunding project is that you have these fees you have to pay the company first. Then after you pay those fees, you've got to cover all your business expenses and make sure all of that is deducted as related to your taxes as business expenses. And whatever is left over is not really a profit, because you got your bills as related to paying your rent or paying your taxes, because all that revenue is taxable. All that revenue is completely taxable. And a lot of people, they don't understand all of the fiscal costs that go into a publishing business. I mean, there's a lot of fiscal costs that go into a publishing business. And it's very, and again, trying to work all that out, plus trying to work out all the logistics of getting all these books again printed and shipped. That can basically wear down on you if you're one man. And that's something I know from my experience, having to get again 3 to 4 books out a year, and this is just print on demand, trying to get 3 to 4 books out a year on time. I mean, that can really start to get to you on as related to things. And it can be really frustrating, especially when you go out and possibly do like your boy Zack might have been, looking to hope to use this whole independent platform towards creating a covert contract where he thought that if he made good comics, this would possibly open a door for him to work at a company like a Marvel or a DC, because some comic creators back in the day, when Zack and I were the same age, a lot of us who saw the indies, a lot of creators would go out here, we would create our comics and think, oh, this comic will, again, leave a good impression on people. They'll see how good this comic is, and possibly this will open a door. But that's a door that isn't going to open when you take a critical look at the modern comic book industry. I mean, the modern comic book industry has been in free fall ever since about 1994. That's when Marvel's editorial decided to go in a different direction, and Marvel decided to buy Heroes World. And those two decisions basically led to the decline of the comic book industry. And while many creators thought that the door would start to open again for them, unfortunately, the door hasn't really opened towards talent based on merit, as some, like your boy Zack, claims. No, what has happened to many creators is that they've gotten a rude awakening as the industry has continued to go on in its whole nepotism, favoritism, and cronyism as related to hiring the same grossly unqualified writers who basically ran the comic book industry further into the ground after the collapse of the 90s. I mean, after the collapse of the 90s, these new independent creators basically continue to get jobs and continue to run the industry into the ground. And that also, again, could have been something that really upset your boy Zack, seeing all these grossly unqualified, I mean, just horribly unqualified and extremely inexperienced individuals going out here and getting these jobs in comics and getting project after project. I mean, they get project after project with these major companies, and that's got to burn up a person who wants to be in comics. I mean, it's got to burn you up to see all of these grossly unqualified people like your T. Franklins and many others continuing to get projects and continuing to get jobs. And that could, again, be something that's really frustrating, because you see these people continuing to get work. I mean, grossly unqualified people continuing to get work, and people not looking to looking to improve the quality of sales in editorial at all, because they basically don't understand how the publishing business works at all. And that could possibly, again, be one of those things that's got your boy Zack really frustrated and really angry, because he sees there's no hope of anything changing, no hope of anything changing at all. And since he doesn't see any hope of anything changing at all, basically that's possibly why he's gone on this bend, seeing that nothing is going to change. But this is something that I basically have been seeing for years. And I look at it's been something I've seen as related to this industry. It's an industry where people really don't want to change anything as related to comics, because comics no longer have the value that they had back in the 70s and 80s, where they were basically something people read for pleasure. No, what's happened with comics today is now that they're owned by multinational corporations and subsidiaries of these corporations, this is no longer a business that anybody really cares about, like David Zaslav or Bob Iger. They don't really care about comics anymore. The only thing that they use comics for is two things. One, they use comics basically as a revenue stream to generate revenue on reprinted material. And two, they create new comics, basically not to sell comics, but to maintain trademarks for their catalog of characters. So the entire aspiration of many of us who wanted to be comic book writers, we basically are learning the hard way that, the job that we aspired to, it no longer has value to those in the business of entertainment. No, in the business of corporate entertainment, they just don't care anymore. And since they just don't care anymore, this is why they just go out here and hire these grossly unqualified writers, because for them, they can get these writers and artists for basically $50 a page or $100 a page when it comes to art. They can get these people for pennies on the dollar, and that allows them to keep their trademarks for another decade or so, because you have to use your trademarks every 10 years for them to be considered your trademarks. And that's possibly what's got him upset, is that he's learned the harsh state of the business of the comic book industry. But this is something, sadly, I learned way back about in the mid 2000s. And while I have always aspired to write comics, I looked at the business and just realized this business is basically done at this point, and it's just around basically as a loss leader for them to just go out here and keep that money in the intellectual property, because the intellectual property, they make more money on action figures, video game licensing, and merchandising than they do as related to just selling comics. I mean, selling comics has never really been the profitable business. No, in publishing, but people basically publish these comic books basically because they wanted to go out here and be able to license merchandising for action figures, license merchandising for video games, license merchandising for movies and TV shows. That's always where all the money has been since the 1970s. I mean, yes, comics did have a nice resurgence in the 1980s, but that business, as related to Marvel and DC, has always been about merchandising. And yet, while they did hire a lot of great writers in that time, basically those writers were basically working work for hire. And that's not really that great of a deal when you really start to think about it. I mean, this is something that I had to sit down and think about, and it's really made me count my blessings as related to not being able to write for Marvel or DC. I mean, that was one of my dreams a long time ago in a ghetto far, far away in the South Bronx. I wanted to be the guy who was out here writing comics, but I thank God that I never got that chance. And I thank God that I never got that chance, because, again, the deal would have been a bad deal, and a bad deal because you're working work for hire. And as you work for hire, you're giving your best ideas to another company where you don't really own anything, and they basically pull profits out of you. They pull profits out of your creations, and you don't get a single dime as related to anything. And that's what makes working in comics basically break your heart. And I think that's part of what's happening with your boy, Zack. That's having him be a man in crisis, is that his heart has been broken by comics. I mean, it looks to me like his heart has basically been broken by comics, the same way the late Jack Kirby said that comics would break your heart. And this business, basically, it does break your heart, because it's just so cold and callous towards people. I mean, this business is one of the harshest businesses. And I'm a guy who studied the entertainment industry for over 25 years. And I can tell you that Hollywood is a cruel business, but comics are even crueler. I mean, comics are crueler than entertainment, because at least in entertainment, everybody is harsh and cruel. But the whole thing is that a lot of people in comics will pretend to be your friend. They'll pretend to be your friend and steal your ideas. They'll pretend to be your friend and basically do you dirty, like what happened to Ed Piskor. Sadly, what happened to Ed Piskor is he thought that he could trust people in this business. I mean, he thought he could trust people in this business, and they basically, again, did this dude dirty. I mean, they did Ed Piskor truly dirty. I mean, that whole scandal basically was something that could have easily been dealt with. I mean, as related to things, because again, when I look at the whole situation with Ed Piskor, I mean, he needed guidance from somebody who was more seasoned. And instead of people looking to help that man understand how to work in the business, what they did was look to, again, destroy this man's life and destroy his career. And again, it was really the thing that, again, disturbed me as related to things, because I'm a guy, again, I have a degree in business. I understand how to move in business. I understand, policies like sexual harassment. I understand policies as related to interacting with the public. And again, Ed Piskor didn't have that. He was an artist, and again, a talented artist, but he just didn't have that business background. And again, your boy Zack, again, took that hurt as related to what happened to him. And it hurt me too, because again, I know how bad it is for a guy in the business. And then we had comic historian pass away, and that was really sad to see him pass away. Again, here's a man who had a passion for comics, but he sadly lost his life in a tragic accident. And that could really, again, have you thinking about your life and thinking about how things are going in your life. I mean, that's what possibly has your boy Zack acting, again, out like this and acting, what the people say he's acting like an SJW. But I just see it as a guy basically dealing with a possible midlife crisis as related to, again, getting older, being in a place where you're not really thinking, you're moving like you used to. Because, again, here's a guy who was moving at one point in 2018 where he was, again, making six figures as related to a comic, about to get that comic distributed at mainstream platforms. And what's happened, again, I'll repeat it once more. I know people don't like me repeating, but the whole thing is what happened is his business has plateaued. And as it's plateaued, he's basically gotten frustrated because, again, business has plateaued creatively. And as that's going on, he's gone to social media and now is attacking people because of the issues he's having as related to his business plateauing, and not looking to, again, think about getting out of that box. Because one of the things what you have to do when your business is in publishing at a plateau state is you got to start thinking about doing some fresh new concepts and some fresh new ideas. I mean, that's something you got to really start thinking about as related to shifting the gears, because running a publishing house, I've always said, is like driving a stick shift car. It's like driving a stick shift car in that, yes, you're going to start out in park, and then you're going to go from neutral to drive. And once you go to drive, you've got to really learn to instinctively know when to move the gears. You have to know how to move your gears and really know when to shift into a higher speed. And a lot of guys, basically, they'll start out in publishing with, oh, I got this great idea. But after about 3 to 5 years, they don't really have another new idea or a new concept or even a new story model. So this is where they start to get into, start getting and not really being able to keep up and keep competitive. What happens to them is that they continue to remain possibly in first or second and can't really push this into third or fourth. And you have to really, again, instinctively know when to shift, especially when you're on a road competing with other guys like Eric July or Ethan Van Sciver. You really have to know when to shift your gears and start moving your stick. I mean, that's something that I had to learn about, moving my stick, because I started out when I started SJS Direct in 2009. I just said that I had already come out of print-on-demand companies like virtualbookworm.com, and I had this screenplay book all about Maryland, and the formatting wasn't going to be something that they could work with. So that's when I decided to shift gears, and I shifted gears and went and started to go into looking into doing my own formatting and distribution with Lightning Source. And that started to become a bit costly because I thought I could be able to find another job, but I couldn't find another job. So I had to abandon the Lightning Source platform. But then as I moved over to CreateSpace, I learned how to again shift the gears, not only as related to, distribution as related to books, but also learned how to shift gears as related to content. Because as I was building SJS Direct in 2009, I wanted to go to legitimate bookstores, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to use them. And I also wanted to be able to reach customers at events. I started doing events like the Harlem Book Fair, but I wasn't selling any books there, so I had to shift gears. And in 2011, after doing 2 book fairs and spending $1,500 on each of those fairs on materials and supplies and fees to get there, I decided to shift gears into ebooks. And I shifted gears into ebooks, giving away material. And as I gave away material, I was also doing blogs, letting people see and get to know my work. And that was a smart choice because, again, in shifting those gears, I was able to start reaching a larger audience. And as I reached a larger audience, I had gotten 2 million hits on my blog, just doing blogs about men's issues. And as I did the men's issues blogs, I started doing books like Stop Simping. I did the first Stop Simping, I think, in 2012 or so, or 2011. And then in 2013, I did more men's issues books. So I understand that you got to be able to shift the gears to be able to keep your company moving because, one, you have to be able to create material that's constantly fresh. And 2, you've got to be able to keep people interested in your material, because when you're in publishing, you really have to keep your readers interested. So that's something that I understood about the business, because you can easily start plateauing. You can easily start getting comfortable. Yeah, a book can sell in the beginning and you keep looking to depend on those books, but you have to understand there's a point where your books are gonna peak. And once those books peak, you're gonna have to start looking for some other kinds of content. Look for some other kinds of content and try to reach different audiences with different kinds of content. That's something that I had understood I needed to focus on. I mean, that's what I did as 2011, as I started building the SJS Direct universe. I started with The Temptation of John Haynes, and then when I was doing 2012, I came up on the 10th anniversary of ISIS and started the ISIS series. And in 2013, I did the Steam series. And then after that, I started doing other kinds of books like the Thetas and many men's issues books. Practically did over 13 titles, and still continue to, again, look to continue to shift and adapt to the marketplace, doing different books, because I understand, again, what can happen to you if you're a publisher is, again, you are going to hit that plateau. And again, once you hit that plateau, that's when you basically have maxed out on the gears, and you have to start to shift as things and move things around and start doing different kinds of books, because, again, we are now in a place where the whole argument of social justice warriors making bad comics, that argument isn't really going to be selling your books anymore for any comic pro. No, if you're an independent comic pro, you're going to be at this point, ironically, where you're going to have to get your material over with merit, and you're going to have to build your audience with just going out here and selling yourself, which Zack isn't really doing anymore. He's going out here attacking other people, and again, attacking other people, hoping that this will get more clicks and views, but this isn't going to get more clicks and views. It's just basically got people really baffled as related to things. And I look at a lot of the comics YouTubers, they are baffled that he's acting like this. And they're also not really taking a critical look at the comic book independent marketplace, in that We no longer can go on the argument of this comic is woke, so I have this alternative here. No, that argument basically has failed now that we have companies like Disney looking to fire all of these activists in the aftermath of billions of dollars in losses and things like the WGA strikes, the box office failures of multiple movies, and the complete failure of streaming. We have all people, these companies again firing a lot of these activists, and that's basically changing the whole paradigm of the marketplace, completely changing the paradigm of the marketplace, where comic creators now who create independent comics, you're going to have to come out of the gate not just saying, oh, this comic isn't woke. No, this comic's gotta be good. And that's basically something that has, I think, your boy Zack thrown for a loop. I think it's got Ethan Van Sciver thrown for a loop, even possibly got Eric July thrown for a loop, because now you gotta actually compete in the marketplace the way I have been competing in the marketplace for the last 15 years. And competing in that marketplace is a lot rougher than I think the boy Zack had actually anticipated. I mean, it's easy to create product when you just are saying that the other guys are terrible. But now that the marketplace is changing, he's got to actually come out with actual product. And again, when you're in a plateau stage, it can be a major challenge to try to get yourself up to the next level. It can be a major challenge for a creator to really try to move things to the next level, because you have to, again, come out of the box that you were in. You have to come out of that box you were in as related to social justice warriors and social justice comics, and saying, oh, those comics are terrible. Yeah, we know those comics are terrible. And they're going to be terrible. And they're basically going to wind up tanking them in the marketplace because the corporations that make them don't see any value in those comics. I mean, basically, they don't see any value in those comics anymore. So this is something that your boy Zack, again, possibly is frustrated about. I mean, the whole changes in the comic marketplace over the last 5 years. And I think it took a lot of guys by surprise, took a lot of them by surprise, because they were like, oh, we're making comics, we're making lots of money. And the whole thing is they thought they would be able to continue coasting, but they didn't understand that in the world of business, in the world of creative business, there's a window of about 3 to 5 years. I would say 2 to 5 years. And you have to be able to adapt to that window, basically shifting on you. You have to be able to adapt to that window shifting on you. And that's something that I don't think your boy Zack understood. And it's got him, again, frustrated as related to the state of his business, that and the issues he's having as related to processing things, as related to, again, the tragedy of Ed Pistor and comics historian, and also, again, just getting older, because as we get older, because he's about the same age that I am. I'm 51 right now, and I know that as we get older, we start to really take a look at our lives. We start to take that critical look at our lives and our mortality, and think about what we've accomplished in that time. And that's possibly one of the things that I think has got your boy Zack on the road to becoming a man in a midlife crisis where he's possibly sitting there thinking about things as related to this comic book career and the state of the comic book industry. I mean, he thought he would be able to do something like so-called save the comic book industry with independent books, but we're seeing a lot of these independent books aren't really having the impact many people thought they would have. I mean, a lot of comic creators came out as the days of Comicsgate thinking that their books were going to be the saviors of the comic book industry. And that's where, again, you needed to have a seasoned publishing professional like myself sit down and talk to you, because when it comes to the comic book industry, no one book is going to save this business. No one book is going to save this business. No, you need to have an editor-in-chief with a vision to set direction for the big two. You need an editor-in-chief to set direction for an independent comic book company. I mean, you need an editor-in-chief who's going to be able to set a vision for that company so that everybody knows what direction the company is going to be in and be able to set a tone as related to quality and standards, because it's not one book that's going to save an industry. No, you need a whole catalog of books that's consistently well. That's what you need, and that's what comic book stores need. Comic book stores need a catalog of quality books. Unfortunately, what's happened at companies like Marvel and DC, the big two, and even companies like Image and Dynamite, is there are no editors in charge like Jim Shooter to be able to maintain a level of standards and quality. No, what we see with comics today is what comics were before Jim Shooter and guys like Mort Weisinger came in and Julius Schwartz to establish standards. What we have here is just a Wild West, because that's what Marvel was before Jim Shooter. It was a Wild West where writers were editing their own work, which you're not supposed to do. And books were just coming out in a spotty, erratic fashion. That's what we were seeing before Jim Shooter came along and actually started running Marvel like a business. When Jim Shooter came along, he basically started to fire writers as editors and brought in real editors and created and established standards. I mean, I could look at a book from 1969 to 1972 and see the kind of sloppy quality, but I could look at a Shooter book from about 78, 79, or up to about 87 when he left Marvel, and I could see how consistent the books are and how the books basically synergized together. I could look at all those books and see how they basically started synergizing together, because my brother had all these books in his collection. And I could see how the Marvel team up synergized with the Avengers, how the X-Men synergized with the Avengers and the Fantastic Four and the Defenders. All the books synergized together under Jim Shooter's editorial leadership. And then you had people like John Romita controlling the art department and Mark Grunwald controlling the facts. So you had a creative team there in editorial maintaining the standards, and all of those people maintained the standards that made those books consistent in terms of quality. So that was one of the reasons why Marvel did well. Then you had Jeanette Kahn, who also had editorial teams, and then you had Karen Berger over at Vertigo. Again, when you have an editor with vision, they can basically get all the creatives on the same page to create consistent books. But we don't have that right now in 2024. No, Marvel's editorial is a complete mess. And I wanted to do a whole video on how the X-Men are just, the relaunch is a failure. And it's a failure because editorial just did not know how to synergize these books. I mean, these books basically do not feel like they fit into the Marvel universe, don't really fit in terms of storytelling. And the characters are just basically all over the place. The characterizations are all over the place. There is no real rogues gallery to basically, again, build those antagonists that drive the story. I mean, there's a lot of issues at both of those companies. And again, I think your boy Zack is frustrated because he looks at the state of Marvel and the state of DC. And again, the situation there is so dire when I look at things. I mean, sales are continuing to drop. Comic shops are continuing to close. And even though we've had Comicsgate come out and they've had these successes, they basically did not really move the needle, to quote your boy Zack. It didn't really move the needle in the long term. Yes, in the short term, some guys basically made some money in the short term, but in the long term, it didn't really have that impact on the industry to facilitate any actual change. And again, wasn't going to have that actual change because the corporate bosses didn't want to invest in the talent. One, quality talent they didn't want to invest in. And two, basically the readership is no longer there because, as I see it, comics are mostly a Gen X and millennial thing. I mean, when it comes to Gen Z, they don't really buy comics because they do most of their entertainment on their cell phones. I mean, they do most of their entertainment on their cell phones. And if they buy anything from what I've seen as related to sales, they may buy some fantasy here or there. but they usually like to buy nonfiction, like I do with the Stop Simping in the workplace and Stop Simping in cyberspace, so they can learn how to move in life. So they also, like Wall Street Tech was saying, thank you for the super chat, Wall Street Tech. He says life begins at 334,500. That salary is very funny. It's funny, but they're into anime and different things. I mean, they're into manga and anime, and basically the American comic book is on. I hate to say it, it's on its way out. I mean, it's on its way out because basically what people want to read is manga, and sadly, people want to read manga not just because it's not quote unquote woke, but it's because it's reflecting the world that the Gen Zs and Generation Alpha see. I mean, when we had comics back in the 70s and the 80s, it basically was an escape from the world that reflected the world with superheroes. I mean, that was one of the fun things that it was. Plus, it was very cheap and easy to get. I mean, comics back in the 70s and the 80s, when I would buy them, and in the early 90s, I mean, you spent when in the 80s, you only spent like 75 cents, and it went up to $1 in about 1989. I remember 80, 88, 89, it went up to $1. And the most you spent on a comic in the 80s was about $2 for those black and white indie books. But these days, comics costing like $5 and the minimum, and it's just too expensive for the average person, especially during these tough economic times. I mean, people just ain't into comics anymore because one, they too expensive. Two, the stories are just sick and twisted these days. I mean, when you look at them, I mean, I was on the online comic sites, and the comics there just they come across as something sick and depraved. I mean, there's nothing there that's family friendly, nothing there that's kid friendly, nothing there that's all ages friendly. And that's the kind of books that basically that drove comic book store sales. I mean, most of the books that were done in the 70s, 80s, and 90s were basically PG-13. I mean, yes, you might have gotten some racy, shadowed out nudity here and there, but you didn't get graphic sex, you didn't get graphic mutilation, you didn't get that in a comic. But these days, I mean, I'm reading standard DC comics and I'm seeing people getting mutilated, I'm seeing people getting decapitated. I mean, this is, or I'm seeing people pushing these social justice narratives that push extreme adult themes. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that really isn't going to get people into the store, and it's not going to make people feel comfortable about going to a comic shop. I mean, going to a comic shop back in the 80s when I was a kid, it wasn't some place that people really wanted to go, but in the 90s, people did get more comfortable with them, and they did get more comfortable getting their comics from newsstands and places like that. But when people look at the content inside of these books, it's just so antisocial. I mean, nobody feels comfortable about giving a kid a comic with a person getting decapitated. Nobody feels comfortable about buying a comic where somebody's being eviscerated. Nobody feels comfortable about buying a comic where people are basically being torn to pieces in practically every issue. And sadly, comics editorial and even indie comic publishers don't understand this whole situation. And that's why the industry is in free fall. They don't understand that the industry is in free fall because the content you produce is just so disturbing. And it's just so disturbing. I mean, I'm a guy who's been reading comics since he was 4 years old. And I look at most of the modern books and they're just appalling to me. I mean, appalling to me in terms of content. And it's been this way for some time. I mean, you don't even have heroes who act like heroes anymore with stories like Identity Crisis and Going Onward at DC and Civil War. I mean, the heroes are not friends to people. They're not friends to anyone. And what's even worse is that people who are a part of the comic social media, like your boy Zack, are no longer friends to people on social media. And they don't understand that part of selling your comics is selling yourself. And sadly, that's part of what's happening with him as a man in crisis. He's not really seeing how he's basically looking out here optically, not seeing how he's looking out here optically. not only to comics YouTube, but also to casual customers. When you have people saying, hey, I ordered books from a guy on a Kickstarter and they did not get them, like I saw in a John Della Rose video, that's not really going to build your brand and build trust with your customers. That's not really going to build customer support as related to your brand when people are hearing, oh, these books, people bought them and then they didn't get them. I mean, that's something I ran into with several Kickstarters where I put in money on a book and never got anything. And again, when people hear this, again, it destroys the whole crowdfunding market's reputation when people don't get stuff out on time. And it also makes it even worse when you hear the person going on rants online. I mean, it really hurts your business, but it hurts the business because the person is hurting. And in the case of your boy Zack, people are thinking that this guy is having some issues. And again, I look at this guy and he possibly is having some issues as related to possibly a midlife crisis, as related to being 50 years old, possibly, and 51 actually, and looking at his life and not seeing things going the way he wanted, possibly wanted to work for Marvel and DC, hasn't accepted that Marvel and DC aren't going to be the future of comics. I mean, that's something that was painful for me to deal with, and as related to the business, as I saw the sales continue to drop. I mean, the comics that we see today, basically with Marvel and DC, that industry is not going to be around much longer because it reaches a point where it becomes unsustainable for Marvel and DC to continue producing 32-page comics. And what they're going to do is what I said 6 or 7 years ago. I had said that what they're going to do if they find that the industry isn't sustainable is what they're going to do is take these characters and outsource them to another publishing division, possibly one of their other publishing imprints, and go to their other publishing imprints, publish a graphic novel of some new stuff, publish some new stuff, and then what they will do is then use that to maintain the trademarks. So you may get something like a Shonen Jump style book where they can publish the material really cheaply and then go out here and use that to maintain the trademark. I mean, this is basically, again, about them maintaining their intellectual property, and that may shatter the dreams of a guy like your boy Zack regarding the state of the comic book industry. But this is the harsh state of the business because, again, publishing is a very harsh business. It's a very harsh business where authors have to go through a lot of pain. You have to go through a lot of pain because, yes, you had to go through years to get this book to the marketplace. I mean, I went out here and I was sending out queries for many of my titles. I mean, I sent over 3,000 queries before I went to go out here and start my own imprint. And it's painful to get that book turned down 4,000 times. And it's even more painful than when you go out here and you do get that chance, because many authors, what we get is possibly only one chance to get a book published. And it's really painful when you get that book to the marketplace. You see it at the Barnes and Noble or you see it at the bookstore. And the most painful thing is seeing that book not sell. And then as the book doesn't sell, you have to sit there and deal with the fact that you may not get another chance to get another book deal because this one didn't sell. Now, the book could be good and well written, but the whole thing is the audience just didn't pick it up. And that's despite your best efforts to get it promoted. I mean, that's the whole heartbreaking. That's the other heartbreaking thing about publishing on the trade side is that you could go through all these efforts to go out here, write this great book with your editor, get that book to the marketplace, and then it wouldn't sell. And that's one of those painful things every author has to deal with on the trade publishing side as related to novels. And it's just as painful on the world of comics where you do all this networking with insiders. You do your best to try to get the word out. But the whole thing is you can't really get in the door. That was what I ran into as related to comics in the 90s because I wanted to be writing comics in the 90s, but I couldn't get it. And I had to accept that you're not going to get in the door with this business. And there was no way to get in the door. So I just started publishing my own stories after years of rejections And even though I took losses on a lot of books, I mean, there are books that I basically were heartbreakers, like Isis Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, where I sold things in my collection to get the money to pay for that cover. And then I just got attacked for that cover by people saying, oh, the characters are too light skinned and they're not black enough. And I mean, but you still have to go on. And sadly, what's happening with Zack is he doesn't know how to go on in this business, because this business is a rough business. Yeah, you can come out and again get your company going, but the whole thing is keeping it going is the most stressful thing. That's what I'm dealing with right now, because sales right now on a lot of SJS Direct books aren't really where they were back in from 2018 to about 2020 or so. I mean, the sales just aren't where they used to be. But I understand that companies do go through these kind of rough periods. And in these rough periods, you have to regroup. And I had to regroup multiple times. That's how I came up with the screenplay books. That's how I came up with the ISIS series and the Steam series. That's how I came up with the John Hayes series after Mike Williams basically talked to me about men and masculinity, and did that book. And I also came up with the Stop Simping book. I had to learn how to adapt to the marketplace. And again, that's where I see Zack's business. He's got to regroup as related to things, because what got you in the door isn't going to keep you on the floor. That's the whole axiom of the publishing business. What got me in the door isn't going to keep me there. And I have to keep going and keep making new material and creating new characters. That's a thing that I had to do after I did the Isis and the Steam series. I had to come up with that new character, Spinsterella, and come up with her story as a Black Goth. And I'm still working on new characters. I want to do another Black male character. That's something I want to do in the future, and possibly maybe do some non-Black characters. But it's just the whole thing is you have to keep working on improving your craft and working on your craft. I mean, this is what many indie creators are dealing with, again, as the whole indie crowdfunding marketplace changes, because what's happening is that you can't rest on your laurels. What got you six figures in 2018 ain't going to do it in 2024. And again, I look at your boy, Zack, and again, I look at him as a man who was basically dealing with the growing pains of success and the whole situation of plateauing as related to his business, and also dealing with the whole heartbreak as related to the business of comics, and that the business of comics is basically at a point where it ain't gonna be coming back. No, I mean, that's something I had to accept. I mean, that's why even after I had, again, 20 plus years later, my brother in the past told me I could revive the industry with ISIS. And I sat there and I said, no, it's not going to happen, because I said, 20 years ago, I said, it's not just one book that makes the market. I mean, I saw that with Giant Size X-Men when I was a boy in 1975. I read the history of that book. It took a good 3-4 years for the X-Men to get popular after Giant Size X-Men came out. I mean, that book was not the instant hit everybody thought it was. No, it takes years for a book to build that momentum and get that audience. And it takes even more time to, again, be able to maintain that audience. So it's a lot of work that goes into publishing. And if you don't have that background or that understanding of how the business works, you'll be sitting there getting upset regarding things. You'll be getting really upset, have your grill cooking up sausages and hamburgers and shrimps and all that stuff. I mean, this business is again, basically a rough business. And you may see these guys out here getting these jobs over at Marvel and DC. And it frustrates me sometimes. I made a whole video talking about where do they find these people, these grossly unqualified people. But those people are basically there because they can't find nobody else of quality to do these kind of jobs, because nobody's going to work for $50 a page as related to writing. Nobody's going to work for $100 a page as related to art for a mainstream company where they're going to, again, make thousands of these books. I mean, if you do the math on $100 a page and 22 pages, that's $2,200. And if you do the math for $50 a page and 22 pages, that's less than about $1,200. I mean, in New York, that's not going to pay your rent. And even in other parts of the country, it's not going to pay your rent. So the money that they pay these comic pros, I mean, it's worse than minimum wage. I mean, you could make more money working at Burlington Coat Factory. You could make more money working at Stop and Shop. You could make more money working at Wendy's. I mean, yeah, you may work a 4-hour shift, but you're at least making $17 to $20 an hour, making more money than this comic pro, and you're making more money. I mean, these people are making wages that teenagers make, and again, looking at this industry, nothing much has changed, and that can frustrate someone. I mean, it can frustrate you because you wanted to facilitate change, but nothing is changing. But the whole thing is, if you see nothing is changing, yeah, Jack, you can make about $17, $18 an hour at Burlington, working a 4-hour shift. I mean, it's not that you can make that kind of money because they're starting wage is about $16, $17. I mean, and if you do the math, you're making the same amount of money on comics if you were to work there full time. I mean, there's not that much. I mean, these comic jobs don't pay like they used to back in the day. I mean, back in the day, they could pay more money because they were selling more units. I mean, they sell a lot more units. I mean, I remember in the days when I was in high school, X-Men was selling 1 million copies a month. Spider-Man was selling, again, a good 750 to 1 million a month. Incredible Hulk was selling 600,000 a month. I mean, those days are long gone. And the artists who used to get paid the big money, the Todd McFarlanes, the Jim Lees, the Rob Liefelds. I mean, I've got a milk crate full of those comics, and they're sitting there, and I need to board and bag them. But the whole thing is that those comics they used to sell millions of units, and as they had a synergized editorial, they were able to synergize the books, and that's what led to the sales. That's what I try to do here at SJS Direct, where I have all the books basically synergized, everything that flows from an ISIS book to a John Haynes book to an Esteem book. All the books basically flow together, and if you look at all the books together, they build an entire universe. I mean, that's what I learned from reading comics, but the whole thing is I look at your boy, Zack, and again, I see a man who's in a midlife crisis, a man who is in a crisis. I won't say that he's a guy like the ones in the man crisis. I look at him and I see a guy who's just basically dealing with some issues of, again, seeing the dream that he had basically fall apart. But that's a dream that we have to accept isn't going to happen. I mean, it's a dream I had to basically give up on just earlier last year because I had turned 50 and I had to say, I aspired to be this comic book writer, but this business isn't the one for me. And it's not producing the kind of content I want to produce. So I'm going to just go out here and charge these comic companies to the game. I never had that covert contract, really, where I thought, well, if I make this comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, it's going to open doors at Marvel and DC. No, I just went out here, wanted to make a fun comic, wanted to go out here and show my writing style to others and see if my writing style worked well as a comic. But I never thought it would open a door for Marvel or DC. And I wouldn't even want to walk through that door based on how damaged the structure of that whole brand is. I mean, that whole brand basically is completely damaged from Dan Didio and Mark Millar. I mean, DC's damaged by Dan Didio, who just basically turned it into an anti-social mess, took the ideal paragon characters of DC and turned them into sociopaths. And over at Marvel, Mark Millar's Civil War turned the heroes into unethical characters. So there's not much I can do over there creatively. I couldn't fix any of that at all. And it's just too broken for any creator to work on. And that can be the thing that can, again, crush a lot of people as related to the whole comic business. But if you have a love and a passion for comics, you're just going to make the comics you want to make and just call it a day and then go back to your day job. Because one of the things, that's why I wanted a day job, because I know how this business is. I know that this business, you can have a book out, and if it's not making the sales, you're not going to make your rent. So doing these books is a side hustle and a side business, and you just have to accept that, okay, this business is a rough business, and if you want to go out here and make the books, you can make them and take the losses. But if you want to, again, be able to be creative, you just go out here, create your stories, have your fun, and go on about your business. Just don't take it all personal. I mean, all this stuff on social media, you can't let this stuff get to you. I mean, this stuff on social media is garbage. Getting into it with people like Heather Antos, who basically is going to be out of a job and basically going to be done soon once IDW implodes. I mean, leave these people who are part of this dysfunctional comic business to wallow in their dysfunction and focus on your business. That's what I have to do it here at SJS Direct, is just focus on my business and getting my books to be the best they can be. That's all I usually focus on, because when I look at the comic book industry, I see it as the sinking ship that it is on. And again, they're just shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic as it's breaking in half. And sadly, your boy Zack, he has to really start to accept that this business is gone and start thinking about moving on. I mean, this business is gone at this point. And at 50 years old, 51 actually, what he's got to start doing is really start to say, hey, this comic book business is not going to change, and start to move forward. He's got to accept that it's not going to change and just move on with his life and get it over and get focused on making the best books possible, and then focus on moving on to something else. So I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. I hope you enjoyed this stream, and I hope you guys will pick up the books of the SJS Direct universe, and I hope you guys will drop a cash up. So I hope you guys enjoyed this stream, and I hope you'll be there for next week's stream. Everywhere you have a good evening, and everybody have a good night.